Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 10 episodes of Game of Thrones, Season 1 through 4. I will give you a spoiler warning for up to Season 4, so if you haven't seen up to the end of Season 4, things will be spoiled for you. So, typically, when I do the episodes top 10s, I start out with by giving my 5 worst episodes. However, I'm not lying when I say I honestly think there are no bad episodes of Game of Thrones. I tried to put together my 5 least favorite episodes, the ones I liked the least, but I couldn't do it. While there are some storylines I liked less than others, there aren't really any episodes I can single out as having a noticeably worse quality than others. So I'll start with my number 10 favorite episode, and that is Fire and Blood. The strengths of this episode are the King of the North scene and the birth of the dragons. The King of the North scene refers to when Robb Stark's Bannermen decided that the North should splinter off from the Seven Kingdoms to once again become its own kingdom with Robb Stark as its king, while they were all shouting, "King of the North!" And of course, the birth of the dragons is the best season ending the show has ever done. I seriously thought that Daenerys was done for, as things kept getting worse and worse for her, finally leading to the death of Khal Drogo, so I was sure she was going to kill herself, but instead, she survived the fire with the birth of 3 dragons whom we were all reassured throughout this season that no longer existed. The weak point of this episode is the scene I have referred to as the worst scene of the entire series, which is what I'm sticking to, and that's the scene with Maester Pycelle talking to Ros after they just had sex. This scene was so pointless and painfully slow in the moment of the series when all these big and exciting stuff were happening. I was literally yelling at the screen at having to sit through this crap. Overall, a solid episode that dealt mostly with the aftermath of Ned Stark's death, with Robb declaring himself king, Cersei and Joffrey acting all smug, and Tywin and Tyrion having to clean up after their mess. Number 9 is The Lion and the Rose. Strengths, of course, is Joffrey's wedding, which was a beautifully shot, and we got to see all sorts of character interactions we wouldn't normally see, and it was topped off by having the most heinous character finally die. It was so great finally seeing that vicious bastard king finally get what he deserves. Also, the Ramsay scenes were also really intense and beautifully done, as we see how defeated Theon has become with the intense shaving scene, and how twisted Ramsay is when he hunts down one of his girls in the most cruel way for no apparent reason. The weak point of the episode was the Stannis scenes, when he and Melisandre were burning people alive for heresy, which is nothing new. We already knew this was happening, and it really felt like the scene was just a rehash of things we already knew. Overall, a lot of great conversational scenes with great moments sprinkled in, like Joffrey's delicious death, Bran's intriguing vision at the Weirwood Tree, Tyrion's tragic love story of having to push Shay away in order to save her life. It all made this episode particularly noteworthy. Number 8 is The Mountain and the Viper. Strengths of this episode were, of course, the big battle scene that was highly anticipated between Oberyn and Gregor Clegane to decide the fate of Tyrion Lannister. It had an ending that was almost as controversial as the Red Wedding, and that had fans reaming and upset and asking for more. Also, this episode featured the best Sansa moment in the entire series, as she finally becomes a player who lies and manipulates people to get what she wants, and Daenerys discovering that Jorah Mormont spied on her for King Robert and exiling him as a result. The weak points of this episode included the somewhat distracting scenes with Missandei and Grey Worm and their weird romance, how easily Ramsay defeated the Ironborn at Moat Cailin, and the pointless beetle-crushing scene with Tyrion and Jaime, which was a rare case of poorly written Tyrion dialogue. Overall, Although it falters at times, it's filled with a lot of great moments, such as Arya finding out her aunt's dead and then laughing at the absurdity of how everyone related to her is dying, and Ramsay Snow becoming a full Bolton, which you almost feel happy for him until you remember he's a violent sociopath. Number 7 is Valar Morghulis. At the top of the list of strengths for this episode is Daenerys' struggle to rescue her dragons back from the warlocks. After a series of trickery and strange scenes, she learns that believing in herself and her magic is more powerful than the warlocks' trickery. And then the badass conclusion of her locking up the people who betrayed her in the vault to die, while she plundered their possessions to buy a ship that she wanted. It was really exciting. Also worth noting is the scene when Jake and Hagar changed his face on screen for the first time after giving Arya the coin to find him again, which was also badass. And then the whole episode ending with another amazing season ender has the army of wraiths led by the White Walkers storm the Night's Watch camp. The weak point of this episode was how badly the burning of Winterfell was handled, which when I first saw it made absolutely no sense to me. I was so confused. I was upset. I was like pissed off because I didn't understand what was going on. Because if the Ironborn were taking Theon to Robb Stark's Bannerman so that they would let him go, which was the deal that they had established in the show that they would make, then why would they burn Winterfell? Who would burn Winterfell? Overall, a powerhouse of that concluded most of the stories in Season 2, where we get the aftermath of the Battle of the Blackwater, including the scene that embodies Tyrion's romance to Shay, which transitions beautifully into the scene where Robb Stark marries Talisa against his mother's wishes. And this scene reminded me a lot of the secret wedding scene in Braveheart. Plus, we get the death of Maester Luwin and Jon Snow killing Qhorin Halfhand in order to place himself with the spies and wildlings. It made this episode truly exceptional. Number 6 is And Now His Watch Has Ended. The absolute strength of this episode comes with what may be the very best and certainly most badass scene in the entire series, when Daenerys buys a slave army with her dragon and then uses both to kill the slavers and sack the city. It was truly exciting the way she revealed she can understand that asshole guy who was bad-mouthing her the whole time, right before frying his ass. And then at the end, how she freed all the slaves and they, stomped in approval, and then they marched off with this massive army and dragons flying and screeching in such a badass manner. It was simply amazing. Another high point of this episode was the mutiny at Craster's Keep, in which Lord Commander Mormont was stabbed in the back, and Samwell finds his courage and as he rushes Gilly and her baby away to safety with the bloodthirsty raft screaming after him with an amazing cinematography. It was also great. There was no one low point of this episode, but the entire first half of this episode dragged on too slowly in a manner that was unfortunately typical of Season 3, with the plot being hatched by Varys and Olenna to marry Sansa to Loras, and Cersei trying to convince Tywin that the Tyrells are up to something, which also features a lot of interesting acting and intrigue, but there's too many of these scenes coupled together, and it really slows the whole story down. Overall, Daenerys' badassery makes this episode, but it's also supported by great moments like the aforementioned Craster's Keep rebellion, Varys revealing how he became a eunuch with a nice twist at the end, and the introduction of Beric Dondarrion made this episode truly exceptional. Number 5 is You Win or You Die. Its strength lies entirely with the intense storyline of who will take the Iron Throne. I think this is the most exciting episode. It's about who will sit on the Iron Throne, and it's really up for grabs after the death of King Robert. And although we're all rooting for Ned Stark, had this been a typical TV series, he surely would have won the throne in the end. but this is Game of Thrones, and is really the first episode that really sets that tone for Game of Thrones. A lot of people point to Ned Stark's death as the key moment of season 1, but for me, it was more his downfall when he thought he was going to arrest Cersei and Joffrey, but instead was betrayed by Littlefinger. And the build up to this was the very definition of intense, with all the scenes, like the scene with Ned and Cersei in the courtyard threatening each other, with amazing acting that really makes me miss Sean Bean. The weak point of this episode is the scene that mostly coined the phrase sex position, in which Littlefinger relates the important story of how he was almost killed in a battle with Ned Stark's older brother for the love of Catelyn, and of course he tells this story while two prostitutes loudly have sex with each other. Overall, in addition to the intense battle for the throne, we of course get to Robert's death, along with the introduction of Tywin Lannister in an awesome scene where he relates to Jaime the importance of family. While on top of that, we get the failed poisoning of Daenerys when Jorah decides to be truly devoted to her, and the speech Khal Drogo gives about taking the Iron Throne for their son just before brutally killing the would-be assassin was the most badass Khal Drogo moment in the series. Truly an exciting episode. Number 4 is the Reigns of Castamere. The strength of this episode is, of course, the Red Wedding, the most tragic and devastating moment of all TV. This scene was so incredibly heart-wrenching and so well done. In my opinion, it steps up the tragedy from the book by having Robb Stark's pregnant wife being present, who was stabbed in the belly in front of him before all the killing starts. It was the perfect story of Robb and Catelyn Stark facing the most devastating consequences for following their hearts instead of their heads. Also noteworthy in this episode are the scenes when Jon Snow is discovered by the wildlings as still being a spy, while Bran is hiding nearby, wargs into the wolves to save him. This features one of the most badass moments in the entire series when Jon Snow stabs Orell, the man who had suspected him of being a spy, while saying, "You were right about me the whole time." I remember clapping when seeing that. The weak point of this episode, if this makes any sense, was also the Red Wedding. As I mentioned in my Red Wedding video, I have mixed feelings about the Red Wedding because it was slightly over the top with how tragic it was. Plus, it was just another event in a series of events of the Starks always losing and the Lannisters always winning that had me feeling that the show was lacking a storytelling sense of dynamic. Overall, this whole episode was filled with impactful, well done, and interesting scenes. From Bran warging into Hodor for the first time, Arya's wonderful interactions with the Hound, Daenerys sending Daario, Jorah, and Grey Worm to sack Astapor, Jon Snow's abandoning Ygritte, and of course the Red Wedding itself. Many people name this as their favorite episode, but because of my mixed feelings of the Red Wedding, I couldn't do that because I do still have some beef about it. But I have to acknowledge this was an extremely well executed and definitely one of the best that the series has. Number 3 is the Laws of Gods and Men. The strength of this episode was most definitely the Tyrion trial for the murder of Joffrey, and one of the best scenes in the entire series, and definitely the best acting in this series. You get this truly intense scene where Tyrion snaps and tells all of King's Landing what he really thinks of them by saying he wished he could poison all of them. And who would blame him after the way he was treated? And the build-up to it was with this heart-wrenching with the love of his life testifying against him and effectively condemning him to death. The moment when he demanded the trial by combat was so amazing. How he was just glaring at his father defiantly because he knew that he was fucking up his well-laid plans to force Jaime into carrying on the Lannister name while ridding himself of Tyrion at the same time. And the daggers that Tywin shoots back at him were priceless. The low point of this episode was how easily Yara Greyjoy abandoned her attempt to rescue Theon after making such a big deal about how she was going to rescue him. All Ramsay had to do was release some dogs and she runs away and says her brother is dead. Overall, an exciting episode from start to finish. Despite Yar's comical abandonment, it was still really cool to finally get to see her go face to face with Ramsay and to see how brainwashed Rick has become, as well as the awesome scene where we finally see Bravos with Stannis pleading his case to the Iron Bank and Davos really going to bat for him and kicking ass, and it puts Stannis back in the game in a really exciting way. As well as a small council scene in which we see Oberyn trying to give his wisdom, Cersei and Pycelle being idiots, and Mace Tyrell being a suck-up, while Tywin starts writing letters, which is always it's always a bad thing. Overall, a powerhouse of an episode with a lot of awesomeness packed in. Number 2 is the children. Practically every scene in this episode was the high point. As scene after scene was just amazing acting, cinematography, well executed, and exciting action. The scene where Jon Snow's assassination plans for Mance goes south, but then he's saved by Stannis was amazing and visually stunning. The battle with Bran and company finally reaching their destination but are ambushed by fast-moving deadly skeletons was super intense. And of course, more amazing acting from people like Lena Headey, as after a lifetime of being pushed around by her father, she finally gets the upper hand by playing her trump card and revealing the true nature of her sisterly feelings towards her brother. And with all the death and tragedy in this episode, the one scene that brought me to tears was the emotional scene where Daenerys is forced to lock up her dragons after learning they've become a liability. Topped off by the amazing heart-wrenching scene where Tyrion finds the love of his life sleeping in his father's bed and ends up killing them both. So amazing. And finally, we see Arya use the coin Jake and Hagar gave her in a badass scene where she is treated like royalty and departs for Bravos. The weak points of this episode were the fight scenes with Brienne and the Hound, and the subsequent Arya leaving the Hound for dead scene. The chance encounter with Brienne and the Hound felt too convenient and just a big hand job to the fans, showing them something that would look cool rather than something that makes sense or works for the story, which it didn't at all. And then sticking so closely to the book to have Arya leave the Hound after building up this close relationship between them in the show that didn't exist in the books also made no sense. And both scenes came off as incredibly sloppy writing. Overall, an amazing powerhouse episode with so much epicness crammed into one episode. I was reaming with how much excellence and excitement and awesome acting and cinematography and just pure epicness they managed to pack into one episode. If it weren't for the poorly written Arya scenes, I would definitely declare this my favorite episode, but unfortunately those scenes held it back a little bit. Since I haven't done a 5 worst list, before I get to my number 1, I'll just mention some honorable mentions that that almost made this list in order in which they were aired. Baelor. Seeing Ned Stark lose his head was truly shocking and noteworthy moment in the series, but I also like this episode for Robb Stark's winning a great victory by capturing Jaime, and the scene when we learn more about Tyrion's past to a drinking game was also interesting. What is dead may never die. It was really interesting to see Catelyn treat with Renly and to see the dynamics at play with Renly and the Tyrell siblings. But what really makes this episode great is the trick Tyrion plays on the small council by telling them 3 different stories to find out which one is betraying them. That was the most clever and witty scene in the entire series, which was executed really well. Misa. The best moments of this episode is a heartbreaking scene where Ygritte encounters Jon, who professes his love for her just before she fills him with arrows, is a great conclusion to the tragic romance. And seeing the heartbreaking aftermath of the Red Wedding, which leads Arya to kill one of the Frey men in anger. 2 Swords. In this 4th season premiere, we get the best character introduction in the entire series when we meet Oberyn Martell in the most badass way. But what makes this episode truly outstanding is the amazing scene in which Arya and the Hound encounter pullover at the end, with an amazing tense build-up with the Hound verbally bitch-slapping the Lannister men before actually killing them, with a little help from Arya, who gets her revenge and her sword back. The Watchers on the Wall. An exciting fourth season episode that takes place entirely at the Wall that explores the wildling attack on Castle Black. An amazing battle sequence with some great visuals. But what really makes this episode great is the emotional moments such as Samwell kissing Gilly and promising never to leave her again, and the heartbreaking scene where Ygritte dies in Jon Snow's arms. And my number one Game of Thrones episode of the first 4 seasons is Blackwater. Mathis! Get down! The entire episode takes place at King's Landing as Stannis attempts to take the Iron Throne by force, and just works so well. Some strength of this episode include the comedic scenes with Tyrion, such as this.
Hound, tell the Hand that his king has asked him a question.
The king has asked you a question.
Sir Lancel, tell the Hound to tell the king that the Hand is extremely busy.
The Hand of the king would like me to tell you to tell the king
If
that...
I tell the Hound to cut you in half, you'll do it without a second thought.
That would make me the quarterman. Just doesn't have the same ring to it.
And a nice tense build-up to the battle, where we see how both sides are preparing for the battle. And of course, no battle story is complete without an epic battle speech, which we get from Tyrion.
Don't fight for your king, and don't fight for his kingdoms. Don't fight for honor, don't fight for glory, don't fight for riches, because you won't get any. This is your city Stannis means to sack. That's your gate he's ramming. If he gets in, it will be your houses he burns. Your gold he steals. Your women he will rape. Those are brave men knocking at our door. Let's go kill them!
The amazing sequence when Tyrion burns Stannis' fleet with wildfire. And the episode is topped off by the best executed and most epic sequence in the series, where Cersei tells Tommen the story while emotional music is playing. We see visual montage of the battle falling around them and everything seems to be lost. And Cersei's just about to kill Tommen and herself when Loras bursts through the door, and your first thought is, what the hell is he doing here? And then Tywin bursts through the door and announces that they won the battle, and you want to get up and cheer and clap that the Lannisters won the battle until you remember that the Lannisters are dicks and you hate them. That's how powerful and dynamic this episode is. The weak points of this episode are some of Sansa's scenes, particularly the one with the Hound, which I found rather boring and kind of detracted from the rest of the awesomeness that was going down. Overall, amazing tense battle sequence throughout, coupled with amazing drama and even comic relief. What's so great about this episode is that it presents a battle with two sides, where neither side is the hero or the villain. On one side, you have the Lannisters, who have no right to the throne that they stole by killing the honorable Ned Stark and starting a despicable war. And on the other side, you have a man who is ruled by a religious fanatic who burns people alive simply for not following his new religion, and who even killed his own brother with black magic. But there are things to admire about both sides. You get the dynamics of some of the people who may seem as evil on the surface, like Cersei and Stannis, and each side has honorable heroes you can really get behind, like Tyrion and Davos. All these elements combine to make one of the best stories ever shown on any screen, and making this so far the single best episode of Game of Thrones. So that's it for my Game of Thrones top 10. I suggest you check out many of my other Game of Thrones videos and keep an eye out for more to come. Thanks a lot for watching.